Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Games I've Got Rid Of and Why. So this is a series of videos where I talk about games that have previously been in my collection but have subsequently left my collection for one reason or another, and I'll try and explain the reasons for that decision. So forgive me if I get some of the intricacies of these games wrong, because I haven't played them in quite some time, at least some of these, but I'll do my best. So let's get started with the first game. So the first game I got rid of is X-Men Mutant Revolution. So this was actually one of the first games I ever got when I got into the hobby, purely based on the IP because I loved X-Men. And this one is actually a re-implementation of another game called Spartacus, based on the Spartacus TV series. So this is a game where you are trying to acquire these different X-Men, obviously superheroes. You're trying to get these students which have different values, and you're putting them in this kind of arena combat kind of simulation, sometimes fighting each other, sometimes they're fighting like a big baddie like Apocalypse or something. You are auctioning to get new kind of heroes into your camp and competing with the different players in different ways. You can place some take that cards on them and stuff. This one, is, to be honest, it's not the kind of game I'd go for now anyway. I was inexperienced when I got this one to the table for the first time. It's a kind of a dice chucker. You're kind of reducing people's stats the more you fight them. I did like this kind of bidding mechanism, as you could, the way you got new heroes and students into your camp, you would actually blind bid on them, and obviously the stronger they were, you could really ramp up the bids. Sometimes you can get bargains, but yeah, ultimately I thought this game was a bit convoluted. I think it went a bit long, and to be honest, one of the big things that I took away from this game was some of the use of the terminology. This had some horrible, cringy use of language and use of words where, you know, the coins weren't just called coins, they were called hope coins, and there was like revolution and just so many silly, superfluous words that got a bit annoying, to be honest. But not my kind of game, and just not a game that's going to hold up in my collection. So no interest in playing this one ever again. That is X-Men Mutant Revolution. And next up, I have Xian. So Xian is actually a game I still recommend. I think this is a lovely intro level simultaneous selection, hand management and worker placement game. And to be honest, I would still have this game if it did have more content. So I really do feel this one needs an expansion or just something to ramp up the complexity, because it has so much that I like about this one. So this is based on the Terracotta Army. So the idea is that you're trying to play these cards with for different reasons. So you want them for the initiative value, which gets you priority on giving you worker placement, but also for the ability on those cards, which gets you resources, it can get you paint, because you're trying to erect these statues and then paint them your colour to get area majority bonuses. A really cool game. It had some another set collection layer onto it as well, as you're trying to collect weapons to equip your terracotta soldiers. Had so much that I like. I love that. I love that dual layer card system, as, you know, what you're going to play for the ability and what you're going to use for the initiative. I think that's a mechanism that can be explored so much further. But yeah, as I said, it did have a glass ceiling on how many times I can get this one played. I did play it quite a lot. I felt there was nothing else for me to explore, and again, I think this is such an underrated gem. And if you do generally or frequently play worker placement games and kind of Gateway Plus level games, this one is certainly one to check out. But yeah, ultimately just didn't have quite enough to keep me coming back. Next up, I have Yamatai. So Yamatai are pretty popular. I think it's from Days of Wonder, a Bruno Cathala design. This one, to be honest, I hated it. I really did not like this game at all. It had a lot of variables within variables, which just really did ramp up the analysis paralysis. And if you are a kind of an analytical player like I am, I try to min-max things as much as I can. This one, it was just insufferable. You could not do it. So this one, you're trying to draft these different action tiles, and then you're building boats onto the board, either starting new routes or expanding on existing routes to try and surround these islands. And you're collecting these tokens to get unique powers. You're trying to put your buildings on these islands by matching up the boats to them to get points and coins in different ways. And as I said, there were so many variables in this game that I did find quite annoying, but also I really suffered with this one because it was so unfriendly in terms of being colourblind compatible. I couldn't decipher some of the components from one another, and of course my brother's colourblind as well, so we just absolutely could not play it. It was unplayable at times. So but I think I've discovered that I'm not the biggest fan of Bruno Cathala games anyway, and this one just kind of solidified that opinion. Next up, I have Half Truth. So Half Truth, I really feel this is a bit of a shame to talk about this one. So this is a party game that came out last year, I believe, in 2020. And this one is a kind of a party trivia style game, as you are kind of bidding on yourself and your knowledge of knowing quite a difficult question. So there's going to be like, which of these people won an Oscar or something, and then you are trying to gamble on yourself on how many of those people on this card of 6 different names won an Oscar. So 3 of them are going to be correct, 3 of them are going to be incorrect. You can play it safe and just guess one, or you can really gamble and guess if you can get all 3 of them. And of course, if you guess more correctly, you're going to get more points. So I love the idea of it. I love trivia. I love party games. This is right up my alley, and I loved everything about it. The problem with this one was that this was taken from a very much an American opinion and a perspective. So a lot of these questions were not really applicable to British people like myself. A lot of them were about American sports, which I don't follow. They're about American cultural kind of things, which just some of it just was a bit of a disconnect. And the more I played through these decks of cards, that became more and more apparent, and to be honest, it did kind of taint the game for me quite a bit. But I did enjoy this one. I would, again, if you do live in the States, this is a great party game if this is your cup of tea. So that is Half Truth. Next up, probably my most controversial game on this list. This is Great Western Trail. So Great Western Trail, one of the most successful Euro games of modern memory, an Alexander Pfister design, set in the kind of the Wild West as you're travelling around this, almost a rondel, which is a point-to-point map, collecting cards along the way, which are represented by these different cattle, visiting different buildings, and then trying to reach Kansas City to trade these hands of cattle in to get points. You're travelling along this train track to go further along to get even more points. You can invest in different strategies. You've got like a kind of cowboy strategy, which can give you more mitigation on getting new cattle into your hand and increase your hand size. It had lots of different routes to go down, kind of upgradable player boards, everything you'd expect in an Alexander Pfister game. And I will say outright, this is a great game. I do really enjoy it. I think it's certainly deserves a lot of the credit it gets. And again, I don't dislike it at all. I would happily play this. The reason I got rid of it from my collection was because I have Maracaibo. So Maracaibo is one of my favourite games of all time. I think I absolutely adore it. And to be honest, if I ever had the choice of either bringing Great Western Trail off the shelf or bringing out Maracaibo, I would 10 out of 10 times choose to play Maracaibo. And there's quite a lot of crossover with the games, so I never would feel like I would choose to play Great Western Trail if Maracaibo was an option. So for that reason, I couldn't warrant keeping them both, but still both fantastic games, but Maracaibo is an incredible game. So unfortunately I can't warrant keeping that one. Next up, I'll talk about another Alexander Pfister game, CloudAge. So CloudAge, I think another 2020 release. This one is slightly lighter than his other designs, or at least his most successful designs. This one has quite a unique theme with it, where you kind of living in this dystopian future where water is a very scarce resource, and you have these kind of hot air balloons as you're travelling from city to city, trying to fight off these different kind of bandits. You are building a bit of an engine to increase your weaponry or to increase your speed, and getting points in different ways. It has a bit of a narrative thread going through it as well if you want to play that way. And I did like this one, but a bit like Xian and some other of these games that I normally end up parting with, it did have a bit of a cap on what you could do with this one. It did feel like it didn't quite have the breadth or the depth that a lot of the other Alexander Pfister games do have. So it did feel a little bit limbless in terms of comparing it to the other games, but still a great design. Had some good scope in terms of building an engine and playing cards. Had a very cool mechanism in terms of how you get your resources in this game, as you have these really cool card sleeves which kind of slip in these resource cards into them, and the idea is that these card sleeves obscure the view of these cards by these clouds, and then you're trying to pick which resource is the most kind of most common on that card. So I really did like that system. I thought it was quite a novelty that worked well in practice as well. But a good game, not a great game in my opinion, but I still did enjoy my time with CloudAge. And actually, the next game I'm going to talk about is a third Alexander Pfister game. So nothing against Alexander Pfister, I do really like his games, and I do like these games, but this is Expedition to Newdale. So Expedition to Newdale is almost the board game version of another Alexander Pfister game called Oh My Goods. So this is more of a resource management, has an element of worker placement to it, as you're trying to acquire these resources in order to achieve kind of end game objectives. Another game that has this story arc to it, if you want to play that way, as you progress onto different boards, introduce different cards from game to game, try to work towards different objectives. This one had a really cool, kind of push your luck mechanism put on top or layered on top of the worker placement, where you could choose to put your workers on certain spots and almost gamble if you're going to achieve or exceed the amount of workers or the amount of resources you need to achieve that. It's kind of a weird thing you have to see in practice, I think, but it was quite unique. It had a good solo mode in this one that you could play pretty quickly in terms of how deep and how rich the game is. And ultimately, I didn't find the hook with this one. I did enjoy it. I didn't love it. I only want to keep games in my collection that I love. And again, would it get to the table again after I played my initial burst of games of this one? Probably not. So I enjoyed my time with it. Wasn't great. Was good, but not a keeper. That is Expedition to Newdale. Next up, I have another game by a titan of board gaming design. This is Forum Trajanum by Stefan Feld. So Stefan Feld, one of my favourite designers ever. I've got a ton of his games. This one was probably one of my least favourite designs by him, despite being nothing wrong with it. So this is a perfectly fine game, as you'd expect. Mechanically sound, nothing that doesn't work, very well balanced, some cool mechanisms, very dry, but that's no issue for me. But yeah, this one, it didn't have the magic and didn't have that extra layer of satisfaction, the extra hook to keep me coming back to it. So this one is kind of your traditional dry Euro. This one had some quite cool mechanisms though, as you draw a couple of cards off a deck, which would show the tiles that you take off your individual player boards, and those tiles would show the actions you could take in your turn, such as getting certain type of meeples or something like that. But as you're taking these tiles off your individual player board, you're almost carving out space to place building tiles, which can let you climb tracks or let you kind of donate people or forfeit people onto this area control style mechanism in the center of the board, which had a kind of a Luna-esque style feel to it. I did like it. It was fine. I still rate it, a 6.5, 7 out of 10. But when I've got a library full of, 8.5, 9, 10 out of 10 Stefan Feld games, was this ever going to get brought off the shelf? No, it wasn't. It's not the easiest game and not the quickest game to teach either, so it did take a bit of an effort. You needed the right group to play it because it's not the most appealing. But yeah, it was fine, nothing wrong with it at all, but not great again, so wasn't worth keeping. The next game is Hansa. So Hansa, I think, is a really obscure and quite a fascinating little game where you have this board of, I suppose, the Hanseatic Sea, and you are moving around this communal boat from port to port. And the idea is you're trying to collect these different resources and visit ports that you've invested in order to sell those resources for points. But it had this really cool economy where if you would sell or pick up goods at certain ports, if somebody was controlling that port by having more these tokens on it, you'd have to pay the money to them. So it had this kind of really cool flow of currency going around the board. You could only take one action at each port as you'd go around, and you had to follow these very distinct pathways. But for each kind of route you'd travel, you'd have to pay an additional coin. And you really did have to map your turns out quite carefully, not to leave opportunities for your opponents, because again, you'd control this ship as one piece, and if you moved it, it'd move it for all the other people as well. So you didn't want to leave very valuable spots for people to visit and make a really great turn for somebody else. I really did like the choices here. Again, are you going to pick up the good? Are you going to invest in that port so people have to pay you money? When you sell goods, you're going to have to kind of dilute down your investment in those ports by reducing tokens on that spot. A really clever, concise little game. I think the reason why this one did leave the collection was because I think, despite the clever mechanisms in it, the game did feel small in scope. It felt a bit too contained, and like you're kind of going through the motions, doing the same thing, and it didn't really have that opportunity to spread your wings, try different things, try different strategies, and it had a pretty distinct path to victory. Now, that's not a negative on the game, more of a personal taste thing. And I would say if you can pick up a copy of this, again, relatively unknown, obscure game, and you like your dry, dusty, traditional Euros, I would say give this one a look, because I think it's got some really interesting decisions there, and it has a bit of a niche that I haven't really seen other games explore. So that is Hansa. And the final game I want to talk about on this episode is Rajas of the Ganges. So this is another massively popular worker placement game, a really bright, vibrant game set in India, as you are trying to place your workers. Beating people to certain spots is great, because if people jump on those spots after you, they're going to have to start paying money. And I like the way in this game that everything, or your resources in the game, were dice. So you'd use dice to do everything. You'd be spending them to convert them into other dice. You'd be buying tiles with them to build on your individual player board. When you built certain buildings, you get points. You could invest in certain areas to make those buildings worth more points. You build up these rows to try and connect them to the outer rims of your board to get additional bonuses. A really nice Gateway Plus game that I think, in fact, I know a lot of people enjoy. And on top of all that, I really loved the winning mechanism in this game, where you would have to obtain a certain amount of prestige points and a certain amount of coins, which are on the same track but start from different ends. And when they connected, that would be the end game trigger. So it was a race, which is quite a different take on a worker placement game. The reason why I got rid of this one was because I really do tend to struggle with worker placement style games, and I really like my worker placement games to be a level higher, or at least to have that extra layer or two of strategy, because I think there are so many different types of worker placement games that fit in that Gateway Plus to medium light level. I would say this is certainly one of the best ones of that category, and I still give this all my shield of quality. But if I'm going to reach for a worker placement game, I probably will reach for something like maybe Barrage or something like that, something a bit more involved, or Sulk in the Mind Calendar, just something that's going to make the gears in your head spin a bit more than this one would. And on top of all that, I've recently acquired the roll and write version of Rajas of the Ganges, called Rajas of the Ganges, the Dice Charmers, which pretty much does the whole experience just on a piece of paper. So it takes a fraction of the space on my shelf, and to be honest, I think the potential for combos and things is a bit more satisfying with the roll and write version. So I would actually choose and actually recommend the roll and write version over the actual board game, which again might be a controversial decision, but or controversial statement. But hey, it's my channel. So that concludes this episode of 10 games. So some really good games here, and again, I wanted to re-emphasize that just because a game leaves my collection doesn't mean that I didn't like it. Doesn't mean it's a bad game, even though I didn't like some of them. Some of them I still really enjoy, but I just can't warrant keeping them in such a limited space, or such a limited capacity for games I have in my house. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have, please hit like and subscribe to my channel, and check out my other videos too. And for everyone else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye.